Taxes. Yeah, I know. For most of us, that word brings up images of complicated forms and a slightly lighter wallet. But what if we looked at them differently? Not just as a burden, but as this fascinating puzzle. A puzzle where governments are constantly trying to balance what's fair, what's good for the economy, and sometimes even what's good for our health. In this explainer, we're going to decode that puzzle, starting with the fundamental rules of the game. So it all starts with this really simple but actually pretty deep question. What exactly makes a tax a good tax? When policymakers sit down to design a tax system, what rules are they following? Well, it turns out there's a classic framework that's been guiding them for centuries. To figure this out, we're going to pull out a toolkit that's been the gold standard for over 200 years. It was first laid out by the father of modern economics himself, Adam Smith. He called them the 4 Canons of taxation, and they are, to this day, the bedrock for judging any tax law anywhere in the world. First up, equity, or put simply, fairness. Now, this is two sides. There's horizontal equity, which says two people with the exact same income should pay the exact same tax. Simple enough, right? But then there's vertical equity, and this is where the real debate always begins. This is the idea that those with a greater ability to pay, the wealthy, should chip in a higher percentage of their income. That's the core idea behind a progressive tax system. Okay, next is certainty. Imagine if your tax bill was a complete surprise every single year. It would be chaos, wouldn't it? Certainty just means the rules have to be clear, stable, and not just made up on a whim. This predictability is absolutely essential for a healthy economy. It lets people and businesses actually plan for the future with some confidence. Then you've got convenience. A good tax system shouldn't make you jump through a million hoops. It should be easy to follow the rules. The perfect example of this is the pay-as-you-earn system, where taxes are just automatically withheld from your salary. It's so seamless, a lot of us barely even notice it happening, which is kind of the whole point. And finally, economy. This one's pretty straightforward. A tax shouldn't cost more to collect than it's actually worth. I mean, if the government spends 90 cents just to collect $1, that's an incredibly inefficient tax. The whole system should be streamlined to make sure that the most money possible actually goes to public services. So here's where it gets really tricky. These principles, they often slam right into each other, creating this central conflict in basically all of tax policy. On one side, you have that idea of vertical equity, fairness, which says we should tax the rich more. But on the other side, you have the principle of efficiency. Economists have this idea that the best way to raise money without messing up the economy is to tax things people have to buy no matter the price, like fuel. The problem? Well, taxing fuel might be efficient, but it hurts the poor the most. And this is the constant battle. Fairness versus efficiency. And you know what? There is no better real-world example of this fight than the Philippines' 2017 tax reform for acceleration and inclusion, or as most people know it, the train law. This was a massive overhaul designed to tackle this exact conflict head-on. So to hit the fairness, or equity side, the train law dramatically lowered personal income taxes. See, for years, because of inflation, regular employees were getting pushed into higher tax brackets even though their real income wasn't actually going up. It's a thing called bracket creep. Train fixed that, making the first 250,000 pesos of income completely tax-free. And the impact was huge. A staggering 99% of individual taxpayers got a tax cut. If you were employed back in 2018, you very likely saw a nice little bump in your take-home pay because of this. This was the big win for fairness. But of course, tax cuts aren't free. The government had to make up for that lost money somewhere. So the income tax cut was the sweetener, and it was paired with a bitter pill. Higher taxes on things like fuel, cars, and sugary drinks. Taxes that are efficient, sure, but tend to hit everyone, including the poor. So how did policymakers try to balance this out? Well, to counter the hit from the new fuel tax, they built in a safety net. The law actually mandated targeted cash transfers, or TCTs, which gave direct cash subsidies to the poorest half of all Filipino households to help them cope. It's a classic case of using one policy tool to soften the blow of another. All right, but here's the thing. Not all taxes are just about raising money. Some are deliberately designed to change our behavior. We often call these sin taxes, and the Philippines' sin tax reform of 2012 is seen around the world as a huge success story. This quote from the World Bank really gets to the heart of the law. Before 2012, cigarettes in the Philippines were some of the cheapest in all of Asia. So this reform wasn't just about money. It was, first and foremost, a public health intervention. The financial results were just staggering. Sin tax collections grew more than 5 times over. But here's the genius part. The law earmarked that new revenue, something like 85% of it was legally dedicated to funding universal healthcare, which basically tripled the budget for the Department of Health. And crucially, the higher prices actually worked. Smoking rates dropped significantly, especially among the young and the poor, the very groups who are most sensitive to price changes. It's the perfect dual impact: way more money for healthcare and fewer people needing it for smoking-related diseases. A real win-win. So you might be wondering, how did such a tough reform ever get passed, especially against powerful industry lobbies? Well, it was thanks to a really clever and kind of strange political alliance. You had the Department of Finance, the bootleggers in this story, who wanted the revenue, and you had the Department of Health, the Baptists, who wanted to save lives. Working together, they were just unstoppable. Okay, let's fast forward to a very modern problem. How in the world do you tax a company like Netflix or Google that earns millions from your country but has 0 physical offices there? This is the huge challenge of the borderless digital economy. The solution, which was passed in 2024, is actually elegantly simple. It makes the foreign company itself act as the tax collector. So when you pay your monthly subscription, that extra 12% value-added tax you see on your bill gets collected by that streaming giant, and they send it directly to the Philippine government. It just levels the playing field with local digital services that already had to charge VAT. Of course, you can have the best tax policies in the world, but they're pretty useless if the system for actually paying the tax is a total nightmare. This brings us to tax administration and the 2024 Ease of Paying Taxes Act, or EOPT, a law specifically designed to make the whole process less painful. Now, this was arguably the single biggest change for every single taxpayer. For decades, you could get hit with a penalty for simply filing or paying at the wrong government office. It was a massive headache. The EOPT Act completely got rid of that. Now, you can file and pay your taxes at any authorized bank or revenue office in the entire country, a huge win for convenience. The law also focused on making life easier for small business owners. It created a new micro-taxpayer category for businesses with sales under 3 million pesos. These guys get access to much simpler 2-page tax forms and lower penalties. It also simplified the paperwork by creating a single sales invoice for both goods and services, which ended a long-standing point of confusion for so many people. So after all that, what's the big takeaway? It's that tax reform isn't some one-time event. It's a continuous, dynamic process of balancing all these competing goals. It's a puzzle of tweaking the dials between fairness and efficiency, between raising money and changing behavior, and constantly adapting to new technologies that change how we all live and work. Which leaves us with a final question for you. Now that you have the toolkit, those principles of equity, efficiency, and changing behavior, you can look at the policy debates of tomorrow. When you hear people talking about new taxes on junk food or plastics or carbon emissions, you'll know exactly what questions to ask. What are we really trying to do here? And is this a fair and effective way to do it? Thanks for watching.